He is a veteran leader in more ways than one. Awarded the Purple Heart and Navy Cross as a Marine Corps officer while serving in Vietnam, then 15 years at Chase Manhattan and 9 years as CEO at State Street Bank and Trust Company, a tenure that saw the company grow sixfold. And along the way, successful stints as a White House Fellow and Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Boston Medical Center. He spent the last 7 years at the New York Stock Exchange as chairman of the NYSE Group. But he's spent decades fine-tuning the art and craft of today's conversation, leadership. The distinguished Marshall Carter joins us now on Leadership Conversations.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Leadership Conversations and an important series of really very personal visits with distinguished and remarkable people. In that spirit, Marsh, welcome to this table and to this auditorium full of people that are very curious to know about you. One of the things we try to do in this series is to literally make them conversations, and knowing you, that will not be a problem. The second thing is we are very interested in the journey that brought you here. We've seen in the introduction, and we've read in your bio the awards and the commendations and the passage of your career, but people in this audience and all of us are interested in sort of what animates you, what excites you, what provokes you, what do you worry about. So we begin and always coming back to the beginning, if you were. And I heard you say somewhere today that you know this part of the country because you spent time here as a child, didn't you?
Well, in the West, in Colorado. I grew up
We
in...
consider ourselves the West.
Okay.
Sort of the Midwest, that's what we are, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Alaska, Colorado, Illinois. My dad and granddads were career Army officers, so we moved around quite a bit. I went to 4 high schools.
Well, as I recall from your bio, they weren't just Army officers, they were generals. And they were all fairly distinguished in their careers, which must have raised a pretty high bar for a young man.
Well, the Army was sort of the family business.
Yeah.
And when I was 16, 1956, my dad said, son. He always called me son. I'm not sure he knew I had a name. Same with my mom. He said, son, it's about time for you to get ready to go to West Point. And, you know, in 1956, you didn't say, I'm out of here. Yeah. So I went off. I actually wanted to go to the Colorado School of Mines, but to be a petroleum engineer. Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't know where I wound up best, the New York Stock Exchange or drilling for oil in the Gulf.
Right. I'm not sure which would be the win right now with the market and the economy. So you went to West Point?
Yes, but I took my commission in the Marine Corps. Yeah. And so my dad at that time was a 3-star general. And people would say, how's your dad taking it? And I'd say, well, he's up and around and taking calls, but not from me.
So there were some silent moments at the table.
Yeah, that's...
Well, and that chapter we'll pause on in a moment because it was a very distinguished and a very important chapter, not only in your life and the life of the people that you so proudly affected, but growing up, what kind of a kid were you? Did you have a big circle of friends? Did you have coaches that you loved? Who were your heroes?
Well, Army brats and service brats, Navy juniors, whatever service, generally have a lot of friends because you tend to move around.
Right. And
the people you knew in Alaska, you know, you see them then at Fort Carson and places like that. So you do have a wide circle of friends, and a lot of them you re-intersect with at one of the service academies.
Isn't that interesting?
So, but I think was fairly independent. Yeah. I had 2 sisters, one older, one younger. And growing up in Alaska was quite an experience because there were, in the early 50s, there was no TV. I'd come home from school and it would be like 25 below, 40 knots of wind, and my mom would say, out, go out, I'm cleaning the house.
Go play in the snow, huh?
Well, another 13-year-old and I sold newspapers in the barracks, and the soldiers had wonderful things to teach you.
So you had a parallel curriculum going on.
Absolutely. This is before Playboy, you know. This is like...
Well, knowing your personal mischief, I can see it had roots very deep in the Army barracks. It's amazing. Then West Point. Tell us about West Point.
Well, in the late 50s, West Point only with 2,400 cadets. Now it's about twice that. It was kind of a monastery. You know, you didn't actually set foot off the place the first year.
You stayed the whole first year.
And except to go to the Army-Navy game on a train. The service academies, all the service academies are all about leadership.
Yeah.
Academics are generally, especially at West Point, academics are probably secondary to the leadership training because you are being trained for one of the 5 or 6 combat arms of the Army, not supply, quartermaster, things like that. You're going to go in a combat arm.
What were the leadership lessons that you as a young cadet really forged and lived through, not only that experience at West Point, but clearly in Vietnam? What did you take away as sort of foundation principles?
Well, to me, the last 49 years in the workforce or in the military, I think there are 3 essential leadership traits that were introduced to me at West Point and carried through. The first was technical competence in your job.
Yeah.
The second was adaptability, because everything changes. And the third was ability to communicate. And those 3 skills, technical competence, adaptability, communications, I think regardless of your job or your position, are still the core. But a lot of, and of course ethics too, and you really get a lot of that at the military academy.
You were honored this morning at a gathering of the Omaha Business Ethics Alliance for the work you have done, both writing, teaching, and modeling ethical principles. So I know that ethics are a core foundation of not only who you are and what you became, but how you've operated in stepping in a variety of highly public jobs, including the one you're in now. Do you see business today confronting persistent ethical dilemmas and challenges, or is this a new thing?
I think there's been a degradation of ethics in the country for the last 25 years or more. Solid ethics used to be a cornerstone of American business. I think especially in the last few years with the issues with some of the banking products that people were offered, that's been sliding away. Initiatives like what you see here in Omaha, the Legacy Project, hopefully will turn that around.
Well, and the question always becomes, when you see a banking crisis or an imploding market or a CEO gone south, you wonder what was missing, what happened, what didn't happen in the experience of that enterprise or that leader to help put in place some kind of a framework, a set of questions, a set of challenges, which certainly are a framework here at Creighton because of the Jesuit education. You know, what was missing?
Well, in the 90s, you know, we went through the longest bull market in history. It was a real go-go years. A lot of dot-com IPOs made people millionaires.
Yep.
You had the sort of celebrity CEO getting a lot of stock options and restricted shares, and I think we lost a little bit of that. But the American system of having quarterly earnings causes some of this because a company has to push for this increasing earnings, as opposed to Europe where they report their results in some countries every 6 months.
And it's sort of earnings at all costs for some people.
It can get that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's correct.
Give me the
Although new regulations have curbed that a little bit.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about is that for financial regulation to take hold, or re-regulation, or whatever we want to call the reforms that are going on right now, we need to focus on ethics as one of the pillars of that. How do you do that? Now, you've been a CEO, distinguished several companies. Now here you are at the NYSE, at Euronext. What are you thinking about that? Is that part of what you're seeing as your contribution, part of your legacy?
Well, it really starts at the top. I mean, a company can't have a good ethical basis unless the CEO is sort of walking the talk and setting the example. And it starts with little things like employees of the stock exchange are not allowed to own stock, listed stocks, because that puts them in a conflict position.
Right.
And the same with myself and the CEO. We can't be in a position where we're taking action at the stock exchange, yet we own 10,000 shares of GE, a listed company, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that we don't seem to have a lot of national role models for good ethics. Or if they're out there, they're being very quiet.
Well, it's sort of heartbreaking I mean, when you think about it, you look at the political landscape where we've had some very public stumbles, and in business we've had even more public stumbles. You wonder how to clean that up, how to clear that up, how to address it in a way that, makes a difference.
Well, I think projects like you have going on here in Omaha, but when the Wall Street Journal puts out a list of 25 American companies starting with Adelphia and ending with Xerox that have had pretty serious ethical lapses,
Right.
I think we have an issue to restore the ethical part of business.